Today we're going to be looking at one of the best knots you could ever learn. This is the bowline. We're going to talk about some of the applications and where you can use this knot, and then we're also going to be looking at 15 different variations of the bowline knot, and I'll talk about places when and where you would want to use those variations and how to tie each of those. But the first thing I want to do is I want to start by showing you 3 different methods on how to tie the standard bowline. So the first thing we want to do is we want to trail down our rope 18, 20, 24 inches. It doesn't really matter. It just kind of depends on how big you want your final loop to be. So I'm going to go down somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 inches. And what I want to do is I want to turn a small loop. Now think of that like you turn the ignition on your car. So I'll grab it here and just flip it and rotate it just like I was turning the ignition on my car. And I'll show you this in left-handed as well, but I'm not as proficient left-handed. So the first thing we do is we turn that loop. Now this is where the old analogy with the rabbit hole in the tree comes in. This is the way a lot of us learned this knot back in the day. So the end of the rope is the rabbit. The rabbit's going to go out of his hole. He runs around the tree and runs right back down the hole. Then you send it through, you'll pinch it here, you'll grab the standing end, pull them apart, and that forms the bowline. Now with the left-handed version of that knot, so like I said, it's going to be a little bit more difficult for me to tie this one. It's just mirrored of the right-handed version. So when the right hand, where I turn the loop with my right hand to the right, counter or clockwise, with the left-handed, I'll grab it and I'll turn counterclockwise. Now I can take and do the same motion. The rabbit comes through the hole, around the tree, back down the hole, and grab it, pull them apart, and that is the bowline as well. It's known as the left-handed bowline because it's tied exactly mirrored of the right-handed version. Now this next method is one of the fast tie methods. It's the one that I usually teach the most. It's the easiest way that I've ever found to tie the bowline, and this also has the added benefit of being able to you can learn the one-handed bowline in this method as well. So what we'll do is we're going to start off by pinching the working end in between our fingers like so. And we're going to come down the line here wherever we want to make our nipping loop is what it's called, the loop, that center loop that we formed. So what we'll do is we'll go over the standing end and I'm going to capture the bottom of it with my thumb like this. So now in one motion, once I have it captured, I want to rotate this wrist and I'm going to bring this hand forward just a little bit and that will form that center loop. So I'll go around or capture it, twist and push up at the same time. Now that's formed the mid loop, and now my fingers are already set into the nipping loop and I've already reached around and grabbed the back end with my other hand. Now I can pull that through, send it right back down the same hole where my fingers are already at, grab it, pull it apart, and this is one of the very fastest methods that you can learn to tie the bowline. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit now so you can see just how quickly you can tie this knot. So what was that? Maybe a couple of seconds. So this is the method that I like teaching the most. It's also, there's a few other knots that are ingrained in that same motion that you can use later when you get more advanced into other knots. So now for the one-handed method of this, let's say, as an example, you're trapped down in a small ravine and a fireman has thrown you a safety line in order to tie yourself up. So with that, you'll have a little bit of pressure on your standing end of the rope, and I'm going to simulate that by just holding it with my left hand. Now what you'll want to do, and I'm going to go ahead and just send this around my body and try to focus this in best I can. So I've taken this around my waist and I got it grabbed in the same motion. We're going to grab, twist around, and now I can reach around. It's a little bit difficult to see, I know, and grab the working end, pull it through, and that's formed the one-handed bowline. Now it's a little bit cumbersome here to show you on the table. In real life you can do this quite a bit easier. It's just a little bit cumbersome in this method. So the one-handed bowline can be tied in this method. It's one of my favorites, and mostly because it's the easiest to tie or the fastest to tie. Let's go on to the next method. So with this next method, this is the method that I use when I'm tying the bowline away from me. So the loop is facing away from me. It's known as the snap bowline method. So what you'll do is first you're going to turn a marlin spike into this rope. So we're going to go down here about 20, 24 inches, wherever, and we're going to turn that same nipping loop like you would turn the ignition on your car. Then we're going to take this loop and we're going to fold it over the standing end. Now we're going to pull a small loop of the standing end up through like that. And then we're going to go with this line, we'll go around our object that we're capturing. We'll send it through that loop and then we'll pinch it back on itself. Now from here, we just have to grab, and what will happen is this nipping loop will flip over and this will form the bowline. You can see how that flipped around, and now we formed the bowline. So that's known as the snap method, or some people call it the marlin spike method. There's several different names for it. So again, turn your loop, rotate it over the standing end, pull a bight of the standing end up through, go around the object that you're capturing, send the working end through that bight, pinch it back on itself, and then pull them apart. And there you have the snap bowline. So you may ask, where do you use the bowline? Well, the bowline can be used in so many different areas, so many different applications that there's no way to name them all. So this is a great knot for forming a fixed loop at the end of a rope whenever you need to tie around any object, whether that be in a sailing application, in camping application, going around a tree, in everyday life. Maybe you're tying this down to the rail in your vehicle to start the trucker's hitch in order to secure or anchor your rope off. There's so many different applications, and in construction we use this knot a lot. So some of the benefits to the bowline. The bowline is great because of the fact that it forms a very secure loop that holds well in tension. So the more you tighten it, the nipping loop will just pinch down harder on this side and on your working end, and thereby hold that knot firmly. Another great benefit to the bowline is that once it's been unloaded, even though you've put a lot of stress on here, it's relatively easy to untie. If we flip it over, you'll see that this forms a bridge around the standing end of the rope. Well, you can take that bridge and just grab it here, and with your thumb just press that back, and that will loosen the knot enough where it's really easy for the rest of it to come apart, even though it's been put under a lot of stress. So what is the downside to the bowline? Well, the bowline does have a downside to it, and it's more evident in this stiffer line, this Paramax. So the reason why you won't see this very often in climbing applications is for the fact that if a bowline is not held in tension, and again, in tension, it's a very good knot. But if it's put into variant load, where it's getting tightened and loosened on a cycle, then what can happen is eventually this knot can work itself completely out. And you can see just by some cycle loading there, simulating it anyway, I was able to take that knot apart without ever actually touching the knot. And it's more evident in this stiffer line, this Paramax line. So that is the one downside. Now there are variations that help to cure this that we're going to be looking at in just a moment. So the first variation that we're going to be looking at is known as the running bowline. Now the benefit to the running bowline is it forms a very large slip loop. So this is great for tying around very large objects. And this is great in applications such as a camping application where you're tying or securing a rope to a large diameter tree trunk or something like that. So there's a number of different applications where this will come in handy, and then it forms a large slip loop that when you pull on the standing end will tighten against whatever load or whatever you are tied around. So let me pull this one apart and I'll show you how this is done. So first of all, this is the main loop that goes around whatever that we're tying into. Now we'll start by crossing our working end back under the standing end, and then we're going to fold it over, and that is going to form our loop that actually captures the rest of our line. Now from here we can turn our mid loop, go up through, go around the standing part, back down the loop, and then pull them apart. Now you notice that in this loop I made it the actual bowline a lot smaller so that it forms a tighter loop there. That way, when we're tightening it up against our tree or whatever, you don't have a very large loop going around the back side of whatever object. Now, I always start this by going under, as I showed you here, by going under the standing end as opposed to over it. And the reason I do that is because I want the back loop here, the back of, I don't want the nipping loop exposed to or rubbing against whatever I'm tightening against. I want this side to be against that object. So if I was to go the other way, if I started by going over the rope and then going under and then tying it in, it will put the bowline in reverse. So now when I go to tighten it, the nipping loop will be the one tightening against it instead of this line. So either way is probably fine, but I just prefer to go under first and then tie it in. So this next variation is called the Cowboy Bowline. It's also referred to as the Dutch Bowline, and it is very similar to the standard bowline with one exception, and that is that the working end of the line is outside of the loop instead of inside of the loop like it would be in our standard bowline. Now, there have been people that said that this is an inferior version of the bowline knot. I don't know that anybody's proven that conclusively. A lot of people just don't like to have the working end of the rope inside of the loop that they formed, and so that's why we have this method. So to tie this one, it's almost identical to the simple bowline, where we'll turn our mid loop. We're going to go up through our loop, only instead of going directly underneath of our standing end, now what we want to do is we want to cross over and just attack it in the opposite direction. We'll go from left to right instead of right to left. Now we'll go under, and then we'll send it back out, grab it, pull it apart, and that is the Cowboy or the Dutch Bowline. So with this next bowline variation, you'll notice that this cures the problem of having the working end to either inside of the loop or off to one side. It's called the Yosemite Bowline or the bowline with Yosemite finish. Now, I want to caution you that this knot has to be tied in a particular way, otherwise it can be a very dangerous knot, and I'm going to show you that. So first, let me get this one apart real quick, break the back there, and then we can pull all this apart. Now, with this knot, because it has a longer finish, we need to go down the line further to form our nipping loop. So we'll start off another 6 inches down the line or so. We'll form our nipping loop. Then, just like the regular bowline, we're going to go up through, around our standing part, back down the line, and we're going to leave a very long tail here in order to complete this finish. Now, we'll want to take the working end of the rope, and we're going to go under this part of the line, and we're going to go right back over it, under and then back inside. Now, what we're after here is to send this line parallel with our standing end. So we're going to tuck it right in here, and then we're going to just run it right in parallel with our standing end of our rope, and then we can tighten the knot up, and that forms the Yosemite finish, which cures the problem of having the end of the rope inside of the loop or off to one side of the rope. Now, let me show you why this has to be tied very particularly, or it can be a very dangerous knot. Okay, so now we're going to tighten or tie the Yosemite Bowline up again. So let me go a little bit further down, form our nipping loop, up through the hole, around the standing part, back down the hole. I'm going to give myself a little bit more tail here. And then we're going to go around and then trace right back out on where the standing end of the rope. So with this, now I'm going to try to tighten this incorrectly. So I'm going to grab the working end and tighten that first, and then I'm going to pull the standing end and tighten that. Now what you've noticed here is that these two loops have crossed one another, where normally it would be tied like this. What's happened here by tying it in that fashion is we have flipped the position of these two knots, or those two loops. So now if I were to take the working end back out, we're just going to pull the working end itself back out, back into what should be the standard bowline. You'll notice that because those got flipped, they are no longer in a bowline. In fact, this is not a very good knot at all, and it can come loose, it can unravel, and this is why particularly this finish is not used in climbing applications or safety applications because of the fact that if it's tied incorrectly, it can be very dangerous. Now, it's a very good knot. It's a very good finish. It just has to be done correctly. So the way you do it is just tighten it up a little bit different. So what we want to do, let me make that a little bit larger yet, get a better view of this. Go around, back down the loop, give myself a little bit more line, go around this side of the loop, come back inside, and then trace back out. Now, to tighten this one up, we first want to grab this side of the loop, grab the standing end, pull them first, and then you can pull the working end in order to seat it underneath the way it's supposed to be. And now we have a very secure knot. And if we pull the working end back out by itself, you'll notice that it is still in the traditional bowline. Now, this next variation is a variation of the knot, of the bowline knot, that's come out of the climbing world, and this has quickly become one of my favorite methods to tying the bowline. This is called the Scots locked bowline, and much like the Yosemite bowline, it really is just an extra finish to the rope that keeps the the working end outside of the loop or off to one side, much like the Yosemite. But this one is a much more secure version of the bowline. So let me take this one apart and we'll retie this one. So again, much like the Yosemite, you want to leave yourself a little extra line because it has a longer tail to it. So we'll turn our nipping loop up through that loop, around our standing part, back down the line to form our standard bowline. Now, with this version, the finish, what we're going to do is we're going to bend it backwards and we're going to send it down through the nipping loop again, and then we're going to curl right back up and we're going to send it out this loop in line with the standing end. And now when we tighten this one, we want to first grab it with the standing end and the loop, pull them first, and then we'll do the same thing with the working end to secure and dress this knot out. And this is a very secure version of the bowline. Now, all of these methods that I showed you, with the exception of the running bowline, are pretty much the same applications. These are just different tie-off finishes for this particular knot, and this Scots locked bowline is definitely one of my favorites. Now, this next version of the bowline is called the double bowline, and what you'll notice right off the start is instead of a single nipping loop, this one actually has two nipping loops, and this is why it's called the double bowline. So this one is actually much more secure than standard bowline because of the fact that it's grabbing the working end in 4 different places. 2 on this side and 2 on this side, making it a much more secure knot. This knot is also a lot more resistant to that variant load phenomenon that we were showing earlier. So this one is pretty easy to tie. Now I'm going to show you how to form the nipping loop a little bit different. This is the way I usually do it. Most of the cases when I tie the bowline, like I mentioned, we'll rotate our loop in there like that. But in this application, I generally tie this one by grabbing a little further down the line, twisting over to the left, and then grabbing it again and twisting another loop right on top of that to form 2 loops. Then we can take our working end, just like the standard bowline, up through, around the standing end, back down. And then this one also has to be tied a little bit particular. You can grab this side of the loop first to kind of snug this one, and then you can grab the whole thing. You just got to work it so that the 2 loops here, or the 2 nipping loops, run in nice and parallel with one another, and this forms a much more secure version of the simple bowline. This is the double bowline. This next version of the bowline is called the water bowline, and much like the name implies, it is a knot that is designed to be used in water. Now, this was actually discovered and used in a time before the advent of modern synthetic ropes, when all ropes were made out of natural fiber materials. So what would happen is when those ropes were pulled through water, because they were made out of natural fibers, they would tend to swell. And so if you had a lot of load on this line and you had your nipping loop, would actually swell up, and it would be a lot more difficult to untie this. So the reason for the water bowline is it creates an extra half hitch down here so that you have half the pressure on this nipping loop and half the pressure on this nipping loop, and so it doesn't tighten down on any one of the loops. They split the load, and so it's much easier to come untied. It's still a very good knot today because I actually like the way it lays, because it keeps the the working end straight, and it also provides a double nipping loop where it captures the working end 4 times. So 2 over here and 2 over here. And it's just a lot more secure knot or version of this knot as well. The downside is for a lot of people that it still leaves the working end inside the loop. So let me show you how this one is tied. So before, when we turned for the double bowline, we set the second loop on top. This time we want to turn it and we want to set it underneath. And what you'll notice here is this is actually a clove hitch. If we were to tighten it down there, that just forms a simple clove hitch. So again, turn this one to the left, turn it to the left again, only set the second loop underneath. And now we can finish out just like the standard bowline. Up through the loops, around the standing end, back down the loops. Only this time we want to leave a little extra tail because this is going to splay out a little bit. So now we'll grab it here, and we'll pull them apart, and that forms the water bowline, which in and of itself is still a very good knot today. The next version of this knot is called the Birmingham Bowline, and the Birmingham Bowline makes 2 loops on the end of a rope. This one is not one that I use. There's other knots that are easier to tie, or even other forms of the bowline that are easier to tie than this one, such as the double or the Bowline On A Bight or the triple bowline, that I find to be easier because you can adjust this where it sets up where the loops are even, but it's a little bit more difficult. But I'm going to show you how to tie it nonetheless. So again, this just forms 2 loops instead of a single loop at the end of a line, and it's meant to be a little bit more secure. The benefit to this one, again, is much like some of those others, is that because we have 4 lines going through the nipping loop as opposed to 2, it actually holds better. So this is a stronger version of the bowline as well. So let me pull this one apart, and this is a little cumbersome for me to tie, but I'm going to do my best to show you. So what we'll do is we're going to start off with our nipping loop. Now, because we're going to make 2 loops, we need to go up quite a bit further, basically double the distance that we would normally, and we're going to turn our nipping loop. Then we're going to come up through, we're going to go around our standing end. Actually, let me pull that through further. Go around our standing end and then back down the loop. Now, here's where we're going to tie it 2 different loops. So we want to pull that in quite a little ways, and then we'll grab it there. Now what we want to do is we want to take the working end back through our nipping loop again and back around the standing end again. So we'll go up through the nipping loop, around, back down, and then you want to kind of hold these evenly. Now you can adjust this a little bit by maneuvering the working end of the rope. If you don't have the 2 knots quite or the 2 loops quite even with one another, you can loosen this, manipulate the end of the last loop to get it a little bit more evenly, or a little bit more even. So that is the Birmingham bowline, which forms 2 loops at the end of the line, making it a little bit more secure bowline knot, though this one is definitely not one that I use very often. Now this next one is called the Eskimo Bowline, and it is still a bowline, but it's tied a little bit differently than what you'll find with your standard or some of the variations of the bowline. This benefit to this knot is that where the bowline is really good if you have a loop that is tying on and getting pulled direct straight line like this, where your captured object would be over here. So if you're tied onto a rail or something and you have a direct pull. But this loop actually is better if it has side tension. So if you're making a very long loop where you're going around, let's say you have two tie anchor points that are relatively close together, but you want to go around them both. Maybe you don't have a center point to tie to. Then this knot would be one of the go-to options, because this one will actually tie around both of those objects. It's very good when cross-loading the loop as opposed to front-loading the loop. So this is the Eskimo Bowline. So let me take this apart, and we're going to start off much like we would the standard bowline by turning our nipping loop. Now we're going to go, instead of coming up through the nipping loop, this time we're going to go down the nipping loop, and we're going to cross underneath of this side of the loop, pull it through, and then we're going to go around this loop, this side of the loop, and then tuck it right back in the standing, or the nipping loop, I apologize. Grab it here, and then you can work this whole thing apart and dress the knot. And that is the Eskimo Bowline, which leaves the working end of the rope inside of the regular loop. And again, this one is very good when the loop is being side loaded. And it also holds really well on an end load loop as well. So this next version is very similar to the Eskimo Bowline. This one is called the Cossack Knot. And the difference between it and the Eskimo Bowline is where the working end ends up. Where in the Eskimo Bowline, the working end was inside of the loop, this one sits on the outside of the loop. Now you can think about this the same way you think about the difference between the standard bowline and the Cowboy or the Dutch bowline. It just switches the position of the working end. So the way you tie this one is very similar to that of the Eskimo bowline. We'll turn our mid loop here, our nipping loop. We're going to go down through our loop. Now, where the Eskimo, we went underneath of this side and then we came back through the nipping loop. We want to switch that. We want to go over this side of the loop, and we'll bring it around and back through the nipping loop and then pull it all apart, and that is the Cossack knot. Now, some people think that the Eskimo can be tied in that fashion, but I'm going to show you, and it's really easy to see on this larger or stiffer line, I mean. So I'm going to tie the Eskimo, but I'm going to try to feed the working end and leave it on the outside. So we'll go down through, we'll go under this side again, and now instead of going to the inside where the Eskimo would generally be tied, I'm going to try to fish it around to the outside, and then we'll pull all this apart, and then I'm going to grab it, pull it, and one thing you'll notice is that by itself it has flipped over. And so this is where some people think that the Eskimo can and the Cossack are the same knot, except you're able to leave it on the outside. That's not true. It's the way you come around this side of the loop which determines which is which. So this is the Eskimo when it goes to the outside or to the inside of the loop, and the Cossack knot would go to the outside of the loop. This next version is one of my all-time favorites, and this is the Kalmyk Loop. Now what you have here is basically this is the slipped version of the Eskimo Bowline. This one has to be tied. When you're tying it on the table like this, it's very particular how it has to be tied. When I'm tying it like I normally would, I would normally go around an object and you can very quickly tie this. And I'm going to show you that method as well. But again, this is just like the Eskimo Bowline, only it's slipped. So now when you pull it apart, you can very easily get this knot undone. This is a great knot and one that I use a lot. So, to tie this one, we're going to first turn our nipping loop. Let me get the twist out of my line here. Turn our nipping loop, and I'm going to actually go down just a little bit further because this uses a slip. And now we're going to go, like the Eskimo, we're going to go down through our nipping loop. We're going to go underneath of this side of the loop. But instead of sending just the loop back in, what I want to do now is I want to send it a bight back through. Only this time I am going to force this to the top side or to the outside of the main loop as opposed to the inside. And now when I pull it apart, this has to be dressed very particularly, especially like this. So you want to first start with this side of the loop and the standing end, kind of pull them, and then you can finish the knot by pulling on the rest of it. And this is one of my all-time favorites because of the other method that I'm about to show you. You can tie this one very, very quickly, but you really have to pay attention to how this knot is dressed out. Otherwise, it can also become a very dangerous knot. But usually the method I tie it in for the quick tie, it has, I rarely get this thing wrong. So, in fact, I don't ever remember getting it wrong in my life the way I tie it. So let me show you how to do the quick version of this very, very convenient knot. Okay, so to do this knot, I have to have a solid anchor point, and I'm going to be using my lawnmower to demonstrate this. So we'll go around the object, and then I'm going to leave about a foot or so of tail, maybe a little bit longer. And what I want to do is I want to grab the working end with my left hand crossing over the top of the standing end. Now with the standing end, I'm going to pull back a little bit, and I'm going to make one wrap around my hand like so. Now what I want to do is I want to swing over, I'm going to dip down, I'm going to grab the working end and pull a bight through. Now from here, all I have to do is yank it back, and that forms the Kalmyk Loop. Now you want to make sure that this one seats correctly. Again, it can be a little bit dangerous if you don't get it seated just right. So take the time to make sure this one is dressed out right, and you have a very, very secure loop that comes apart incredibly quickly. Now this next version is one of my absolute go-to knots for a lot of different applications. Now this one is called the Portuguese Bowline, and you can actually tie this two different ways. Now at first glance it looks like it is the same thing as the Birmingham Bowline, but in fact it is quite a bit different. Now the great benefit to this one is that even after you have it tied up, you can very easily adjust the size of the loops in order to match them up, and that's one of the great things about this knot. So first let me show you this version of the Portuguese Bowline, and then I'll show you the Splayed version, which is generally what I'll use this particular knot for. Okay, this knot actually uses a lot of line too, because we have a double loop. So we're going to come down quite a bit further on our line. We're going to turn our nipping loop. Now we're going to take our rope around, and we're going to lay a loop in, but we're going to lay it so that the top of the loop comes over our nipping loop here. I'm going to pull that just a little bit more. Now when we bring our working end around, now we can finish out like we would the regular bowline, where we go up through the nipping loop, go around the standing end, back down, and then we can pull it all apart. Now you don't really have to worry about getting these loops perfect, which in this case I got them pretty close, because like I said, this one can adjust very easily back and forth to match the loops up. And so it's a very secure knot, and provides that double wrap or double loop there. So this is a very good knot, but it has the benefit over the Birmingham where you can actually adjust the size of the loops after the fact. So let me show you the Splayed version of this knot, which is the one I use. Okay, to tie this version, which is the version that I use the most, first we want to tie our nipping loop. Now instead of going around with our first loop, this time we want to splay it out. So I'm going to make my loop off here to the left, and then I'm going to turn to the left and come back across like so. Then when I come back up to the right, now I can go through my nipping loop. I've formed this second loop now. And this is where it would be just a little bit different because I want the working end to be inside. Then I'm going to go around to the left side of the standing end, send it back through, grab it, and now I can tighten it up. And again, much like the other version of this, it's very easy to adjust the loops. So an application where you would use this is if you are, say you're tying to a sled and it has two anchor points, one on either side of the sled, but you want to pull it evenly in the center. This is how you would tie it up. My application in construction, I use this knot to tie some very oblong materials when we're pulling them up to heights where the rig points are set out further, but I need to pull it up even and equally, and this is the version that I'll use to tie that. It's one of my all-time favorite versions of the bowline. Now the next version that I'm going to show you is really similar to the Portuguese bowline. It's called the French bowline, and it has similar characteristics where you can have it, you can tie it both in the splayed and in the double loop version. So we'll start by making our nipping loop. Only this time, instead of forming this loop that goes around and sits on top of our nipping loop, we actually want to go through the nipping loop first before making our loop, and then we'll come back around, and this time we'll go up through the loop. We'll go around our standing end and back down the loop. And don't worry about this one if the loops aren't even yet, because much like that other one, you can very easily adjust the size of the loops, and this forms the French bowline. I don't know that there's really any benefit to one over the other. I don't really tie the French bowline that often, though I do know how to tie it. It may be a little bit better, but I've never had any problems with the Portuguese bowline. And then let me take this apart real quick, and we'll do the splayed version of this same knot. So we'll go form our nipping loop, and this time we're going to go around and bring our loop out here to the left hand side, and we're going to go through the nipping loop just like so. and then we're going to come up through the nipping loop after we form our loop on the right hand side. And again, this time I'm going to go to the left and then bring it right back down the loop so that my working end stays inside. And now we can very easily rotate this one around as well. So the French bowline or the Portuguese bowline, they're very, very similar. There's only one slight difference where when you're making that first loop, you want to go through the nipping loop as opposed to staying on top of it. This next version of the bowline is a very, very useful knot. This one's called the Bowline On A Bight, and this will allow you to tie a double loop bowline, but in the center of a rope. You don't have to have access to the end of it. So if, let's say as an example, you have a very long rope and you don't want to have to go all the way to the end to tie your anchor point for that rope, then you would use something like the this bowline, which is the Bowline On A Bight, and that will give you an anchor point in the middle of the rope. So that's the whole purpose of it. This one's actually very easy to tie. So let me take this one apart real quick and I'll show you. So first of all, we're going to start in the center of our rope. We're going to form our bight, and then we're going to tie this sort of similar to the way I showed you in that fast method of tying the bowline, where we're going to have it in our hand here. We're going to cross over and then we're going to rotate like so. Now instead of going around the standing end, now what we'll do is we'll just take this loop and we're going to fish it round the top here, and then these two are going to pull back and these are going to form our actual loop. And then we just want to make sure that you get everything dressed out properly on this one so everything lays in there nice and parallel. And now you've created the Bowline On A Bight, which is fantastic for tying in a fixed loop in the center of a rope. Now the next version is called the triple bowline, and it is also formed on a bight, except it's going to leave 3 loops instead of 2 loops. So what we want to do is, again, we're going to start off anywhere in the center of our rope. We're going to come over, form our nipping loop, turn it over. Now instead of, actually let me go out a little bit further with this knot. So I'm going to try this again. We're going to go over, form our nipping loop. Now instead of where the the Bowline On A Bight came and brought that loop around, now we're going to finish this out like we would a standard bowline. We'll go around the working end, we'll come back down through, and only this time we want to bring this up so that it's equal or evens up with our remaining loops. And we also want to make sure that this is laying in there nice and parallel. So let me flip all this over a little bit here, get everything adjusted correctly. And I got this one twisted. That just does not want to lay in there parallel for me today. There we go. Okay, so now we can adjust this one out, and this one leaves 3 loops. This one is a little cumbersome for me because I always have a hard time getting these to match up. Now I've got my 3rd loop here a little bit long. I can adjust this by pulling back a little bit, lengthening the other loops, and get it a lot closer. But this one can be a little bit cumbersome to adjust, but it does provide a very, very strong loop with that triple lay on the loop. So the last version that I'm going to show you is a knot that I don't ever remember using myself personally. I know how to tie it other than tying it on tabletop. I've never put it to actual use, but this is a very important knot to learn because it's one of those rare knots where it could come in handy for you later down the line. This is a search and rescue knot, and what it's designed to do is to form 2 splayed out loops where they can be used to go around a victim's legs if somebody needs to be pulled or transported out of a fallen area like a ravine or a cave or any number of things. So it's called the Spanish bowline, and the way it works is we're going to start off in the middle of our rope, and then I'm going to turn 2 loops by turning this hand clockwise and this hand counterclockwise. We're going to form 2 loops. Now, for practical purposes, you'd want to turn these loops a lot bigger than what I have turned them here, but this is just so you can see how this is done. Then we want to take these loops and we want to turn them and twist them one more time. And then we get this shape. Now you want to take the left and you want to send the left loop through, up, go under the right loop and then send it up through. And then we're going to pull them apart a little bit. Now we want to reach through these two lines, and on this side we're going to grab the line here, and on this side we're going to grab the line here, and then we're going to pull those apart, and that's going to form our loops. So I'll just work these out, get it all dressed up. And the benefit to this one also is that it also, you can, once you get it set, of course the loops would be larger. Obviously this wouldn't go around a victim's leg in that small of a loop, but once you get it set where you like it, then you can adjust the size to even these two loops out. And then this would go, you would place the victim's legs in there and then be able to pull them out and up to safety. So this is not a knot that I've ever used, but it sure is an important one to know for that one time you may need it. So this has been a look at the bowline, a couple different ways to tie it, and 15 different variations of the knot. And I tried to do my best to explain in applications where you would use these particular knots. Now, of all of these knots, there's really only 4 that I generally use. The standard bowline for more lighter applications. I use the Kalmyk Loop a lot when tying a load down as the anchor point to start tying down a load to a truck or a trailer, because it's, first of all, it's a slip loop. I love that knot because once it's a very secure knot once you get it set properly, and it's a slip, it's easy to untie. So I use that one a lot. This one has become one of my favorites, and one that I use more often than not when I have a more critical application for it, where I'm going to be putting a lot of strain on the fixed loop, in the Scots locked bowline, one of my all-time favorites. And finally, the last one is the Portuguese bowline. I find that knot, I use it at work a lot for lifting up different material and cargo. So I found those 4 knots to be the most useful of the groups. I hope this has been informative for you. And if you have any questions, just put them in the comments below. I'll try to get back with everybody. I appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you in the next one.